In this video, I'm going to show you how to debug your code in Visual Studio. Now, this is something that a lot of students seem to be quite afraid of. What I will say, as far as I'm concerned, is that this is the place where I start. I will write some code, and the first thing I will do before I even run it is start debugging it, because I don't have the brain capacity to be able to work out if code is working or not by just running. I need to debug it. So here are the things you need to know. F5 runs to the next breakpoint. F9 is used to add or remove a breakpoint. F10 steps over to the next instruction, and F11 steps into a function if one is present on that line. And it's worth pointing out that you can sometimes have multiple functions on a line of code, and it will step into the functions in the order that they execute in the actual program. So it might be that you have nested functions within a line of code, which is perfectly acceptable and perfectly normal to do. It will step into the code in the order that it would execute. A couple of extra ones which aren't obvious but are very useful is sometimes if you're in a function, it might be that you just need to debug the first couple of lines of code just to get reassurance that that particular part of the function is working, and then you want to step out of that function. Shift and F11 runs to the end of the function and returns you to the line that called that function. And the other thing as well is Shift and F5 just stops debugging. It basically shuts down. It's the equivalent of pressing the little stop button. Now, in Visual Studio, if you are unsure about these, all of the F keys are located here, or you can just use the menu. I mean, look, here we go. I've actually got breakpoint here, but we can remove that breakpoint by going toggle breakpoint. And we can do the same here, toggle breakpoint, or use F9. We could click start to run, okay? Or I could press F5. It doesn't really matter, okay? Now, when the breakpoint is hit, so this is my form load, this is the school bank project that you might have done. But when we hit a line of code, you get a little arrow. Now, that arrow is pointing to the next line of code that will be executed. This line here has not actually been executed yet, okay? And I'm just going to show you how you can use the menu. So look, here we go. I'm going to step over this line of code, and so what happens is it executes this line of code and goes to the next line. Now, the beauty of this is that everything that has just been done, we can look at it. So there is now, so this line of code is basically saying, take something called type database, which is a class because I've created it, give it a variable. The variable is called database, and it is of type database. And it is a new database. So basically create a database and assign it to a variable called database. And if I hover over it, I can see all of the various bits and bobs inside. Now, you'll notice there's a little lock sign there because that's basically saying there is inside there is something called constring, a member variable, and it's set to that. Okay. Now, I'm now about to execute this line here where we're calling initialize method on the database object. And I'm going to step in, right? Now I'm going to do it on the menus just so that you can see what's actually going on, but normally I would press F11 at this point here, but I'm going to step into it because I want to go into initialize. So here we go, there I am in initialize. And now I'm going to do some stepping over. So here we go, step over. Now, one thing to bear in mind, you'll notice here that we're going to call a static function called exists. Now, something to bear in mind is that you can't step into C# functions. The code is not actually available for you to step into. So if I try and press F11 now to step into it, well, in this particular case, it's just stepped right over it because it turns out that this particular file does exist. So that's kind of tells me something straight away. But the point is, we didn't step inside exist because it doesn't actually exist. Now, one thing you can do is you can use F12. Okay, so I'm going to add this actually. I'm just going to put it on here. So F12. So this is kind of like the new bit. So useful functions. Here we go. Is F12. Let's make this a bit bigger. F12 is a really cool thing. So takes you to the definition of that function. Okay, so here we go. I can click on here. If I click F12, what it will actually do is there we go. So this is actually, it's actually uncompiled it, but it's found it. So this is kind of the definition. I mean, it's kind of useful because it basically tells me it's taking a string to a string that is the path, and it's going to return a boolean. And really, that's the only information that you actually will ever need from this. Now, it's calling this function called internal exists helper, whatever that is, okay? And notice at the top here it says file decompile. You can't change any of this. You can't do anything with it. This is kind of part of the C# system. But it does tell us, usefully, returns a boolean, takes a string. Okay, and that's all we kind of need at this point here. But it might be that we want to find where the function initializes. So here we go, look, F12. Ah, it's there. It's taken me straight to it. Okay, and I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in here that's sort of useful. That I could do an F12 on. Not really, but if I go to my Solution Explorer and maybe I go to accounts, I don't know, I'm just sort of making this up really. Oh, there we go. So we've got database. Let's go to find create account. Okay. Oh, and there we go. It's straight away it takes me to where the code is for create account. So F12, really useful function. Now, one last thing. So let me just try and get rid of this school banks thing here. So the last thing that I want to show you that is useful. Why is it not? Oh, it's because I've still got it right. So I'm going to go Shift F5 to stop debugging, and that has released the file, so I can delete debug that, and I'm just going to press F5 again and run it. Now, I'm just going to come into here. Okay, so the file doesn't exist, so we're going to create it using the connection string, and I can view the connection string here because I can just hover over it. I can press this little magnifying glass that kind of puts it in a window, which I find really useful, especially if you've got a string that is created from lots of little bits of strings. You can actually see what was actually created as opposed to just look at the code, which often isn't useful. Now, down here you'll notice that we've got a series of command texts. And what I can do is if I right click on the command text, I can do something called add a watch. Now a watch really just highlights a particular variable, and what I can do is if I just click that down there, the name is command text down here, but now at the moment there's nothing there because it's not actually been created yet. It gets created here. But if I just F10, so I'm doing a little step over F10, so I'm coming down here, and now actually, hang on, let's just do this again. What I actually want to add to my watch is this command text, right click, add to watch. There we go. And if I just minimize, hang on, let's get rid of that. There we go. So now it's telling me that it's of type string. And this is it. Create table, classes, class char3, teacher, varchar 20, primary key, class, and so on. But you'll notice that it changes, and as it changes, it will change down here automatically. So here we go. There we go. And when it does change, it highlights in red, which is really useful because sometimes you get variables which sometimes they change and sometimes they don't. But when it actually does change, it changes into red. So here we go, so that's changing again, so that's correct, and it's going to change again, and that's correct. And then we've got our execute, and we're coming down, and this is all working, so it changed again to another create table. And finally we've closed, and now I'm just going to run it, and there we go. Okay, so that was my little schools project. So just a kind of little refresh, these are the top tips that you need, and don't be afraid to use breakpoints. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that you don't have to stop in order to actually make things work. Let's put a breakpoint in here. So there's my app. It's still there. Or at least I think it's still there. Is it still there? Right, let's just run it up. So F5 to run. There we go. So it's running, okay, but I can still add breakpoints. Look, I'm going to add a breakpoint there, and let's put a breakpoint there to see what happens. And we can even put a little breakpoint here, F9. And now if I just click something, there we go. So you can put breakpoints in live. Oh, the other thing as well you can do is if you run a line of code but you want to see it happen again, you can just move, click and drag it back up. So we've done show dialog. Well, if you step inside there, you get all sorts of things. There we go, form accounts load. There we go, all sorts of things going on there. Okay, so F5. So let's just summarise once more time. There we go. F5 to run to the next breakpoint. F9 to add and remove breakpoints. F10 step over to the next instruction. F11 step into a function. Shift and F11 is to step out of the function. If you obviously if you step to the end, it will return anyway. And then finally, Shift and F5 stops debugging. Good luck. Have fun. And happy debugging.